City Councilor. I'm the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Government Operations. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Councilor Edwards from District 1, at-large Councilor Louis Jen, Councilor Braden, and at-large Councilor Julia Mejia. This public hearing is being recorded. It is being live streamed at boston.gov/City Council TV and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. We will be taking public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you're interested in testifying, please email cc.go@boston.gov for the link. Today's hearing is on docket number 0222, message in order for your approval, a home rule petition to the general court entitled Petition for a Special Law regarding an act relative to the real estate transfer fees and senior property tax relief. I'm going to kick it over to councilors in order of arrival for opening statements if they have any. And also when we get to the Q&A, this will be the same order that we use for questions to the panel. Today's expected attendees, and I believe they're all here. We have Commissioner Nicholas Ianniello. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, please correct me later. Commissioner of Assessing, Chief Sheila Dillon, who's the Chief of Housing for the City of Boston, Tim Davis, who's the Deputy Director of Policy at the Mayor's Office of Housing, and Commissioner Emily Shea, who's at the Age Strong Commission. And so with that, I'm going to kick it over to the councilors. I'm going to now go to Councilor Edwards if she's ready. I know that I believe in her first term, this is actually sort of her baby. And so I'm going to kick it over to Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you all. I apologize for not being on camera, but I am very excited about this conversation continuing. It was in my first term that we managed to get this out of our collective body over to the State House, and we were pushing for basically sustainable sources of funding to help us make sure that no matter what happened, a pandemic, a recession, that as long as there was real estate moving and as long as the city or developers are making money, that the city of Boston could always have a sustainable fund to help subsidize affordable housing. And this is exactly what we need. If we learned anything, we this moment where we're getting huge amounts of federal funding, it's not going to last. We need to make sure that after this is passed through, that we actually have sustainable sources of funding. This is something that is not only sustainable, but it's fiscally responsible. The major differences that I have found between the prior version that we passed and this one actually make this, I think, more palatable for a lot of people in Boston. This is coupled with senior relief and making sure that people who are aging in Boston in their homes actually are getting the break, much needed tax break that they need. At the same time, this is now basically an exclusion of the first $2 million from any of the transfers, so that the entire $2 million isn't taxed, but whatever comes after $2 million is actually the transfer fee applies to it from 2%. So I would love to hear from the administration about how that impacts. I know the entire $2 million and up was going to raise $100 million. I don't know that this is going to do that, but essentially, this is something I fully support. This is the conversation that we have been desperately needing, and I'm excited. I want to thank Mayor Wu, my goodness, for her leadership in this conversation. I hope all of my colleagues will support this ultimately when we get it ready to go to the floor. My final point, and something that I would love to talk to, I don't know if we're going to do a working session or not, Councilor Arroyo, but I would like to talk about 100% affordable developers, or CDCs, and nonprofits, and whether the administration had planned for them to also have this apply to them. Is there a certain threshold if you're producing affordable housing that we would need to apply this fee to or not? So that was a lot. I'm beyond excited. I look forward to getting on camera shortly, and thank you for hosting this so quickly, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I think this is something that we have broad support for on the council. So it may go through a working session. I'll obviously take the temperature, but I think this is a fantastic thing myself. Now I just want to shout out a couple of the councilors who've shown up, and then I'll let folks know sort of the order so that folks know when they are going to be coming up. I want to also note that Councilor Bach has joined us, Councilor Worrell has joined us, Councilor Baker has joined us, Council President Ed Flynn has joined us, and Councilor Tanya Anderson Fernandez has joined us. We are going through opening statements. Next up is Councilor Louis Jen, followed by Councilor Braden. Councilor Louis Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm happy to be here. I want to thank Councilor Edwards for her work on this. I know former Mayor Janey, when Councilor, was also really active on the real estate transfer fee. So I'm grateful to have a mayor who cares deeply about affordable housing and to see how we can benefit from a market that has really resulted in further cleavaging the differences between the haves and the have-nots. This is a way for us to be able to extract some of the wealth that's been gained from the speculative market. So I'm excited about this real estate transfer fee and the possibility of further bolstering the neighborhood housing trust. Also, one of the many early calls that we get into our office is from seniors who need help with, property taxes. I had a call with Commissioner Shea earlier this week, and that's something that we talked about. And I think this would be a really great opportunity for our seniors to experience less stress in their daily lives by having more assistance under a more expansive view of 41C. So I'm really excited for this discussion and to see what's possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louis Jen. Councilor Braden, who will be followed by Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden, the floor is yours. All right, we'll go to Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden, when you're ready, just let me know. Councilor Mejia, the floor is yours, followed by Councilor Bach.
Yeah, thank you to the chair for holding this hearing. This is an exciting opportunity to be doing more to assist in the creation of affordable housing across the city of Boston. We're not only lacking enough affordable housing, we lack enough housing, period. And this lack of housing often impacts our lowest income residents, our senior residents, and our residents of color the most. A transfer fee is a great resource to be building funds towards the creation of affordable housing. And I look forward to this conversation and learning more about this process. And I'm super excited that Councilor Edwards is leading the way in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden, whenever you're ready, just raise your hand if you want to do an opening statement. At this moment, I'm going to go to Councilor Bach, followed by Councilor Worrell.
I just saw Councilor Braden unmute, so I'm happy to yield to her if she's ready.
Councilor Braden, if you'd like to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the makers of this ordinance. I just wanted to listen in and learn more about how this is going to work. I think it's a very important initiative and well worth the effort of trying to enact it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Bach, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the departments who've been involved in drafting this. I'm so excited about it. I was proud to stand with the mayor on it, and grateful, as has been mentioned, to the leadership of Councilor Edwards, former Mayor Janey, and others on pushing this forward. And really, I think that it's great to have found a way to combine this push for a transfer fee with this long-term senior resident property tax relief. I'm sure that he'll speak to it. But President Flynn was pushing this issue a year ago, and we had some significant working sessions in February and March of last year on sort of how do you figure out the right program that's going to both really help our long-term seniors to stay in our communities and also make sure that you're not eroding the tax base, giving that break to sort of larger entities and owners. And so I appreciate the administration working hard off that basis of all the work that we've done last year to thread that needle. And I see that the commissioner is on here, Commissioner Arnello. And I think the combination is great because I think so often, what folks find challenging about property taxes is that although they have an asset that's appreciating, if their main experience of that asset is as the home that they are actually trying to stay in the city in and they don't want to liquidate it, that raises all kinds of challenges. And so I think it's one of the great virtues of a transfer fee that it places the tax at the moment of transfer, at the moment of liquidating the property. So we can't say that there isn't sort of money available. And I think that taking those moments of sale and having them circulate back to creating the public good of more housing in the city for people and especially for low-income folks, it's a critical harnessing and a really good way of thinking about how to make sure that we don't keep developing into a Boston where there's a bigger and bigger divide between the haves and have-nots. So I agree with Councillor Edwards. Definitely want to understand what our kind of estimates are, our updated estimates for what we would get from this, and understand both what the break for the seniors does in terms of our expected lost tax revenue and what the gained tax revenue is from the transfer fee. But I just think I think so often the financialization of housing and then the actual role of housing people are put at loggerheads with each other, and financialization is winning out these days. And so the ability to reverse that and really harness that financialization for our folks staying in the city is just so important. So I'm thrilled to be supportive of this and looking forward to the hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Councillor Worrell will be followed by Councillor Baker. Councillor Worrell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mayor Wu, former Mayor Janey, and Councillor Edwards for making affordable housing and senior tax relief a priority. Just interested in hearing more about this conversation. When I was on the doors, a lot of our seniors were talking about senior tax relief. And one thing that I heard was, a lot of seniors are house rich but cash poor. So there's some relief that's coming towards them through this bill. And then also just trying to slow down the displacement by building affordable housing. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. Councillor Baker will be followed by Council President Flynn. Councillor Baker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm more here interested to see how we're tying the senior piece into this. I think that this is not a good time for a transfer tax. I'm not in favor of a transfer tax. I think at some point we as a council need to figure out how much we're going to keep hammering the real estate community in homeowners and small property owners, because whenever we come up with these sorts of grand ideas that go after the property owners, it hurts the smaller property owners. Never hurts the larger property owners, because they're the ones that are going to stay in the business no matter what it takes. But I am interested to see how this is potentially going to help our seniors. I think we should be helping our seniors and should be having the conversations without attaching it to a transfer tax. And at a minimum, I think that people that own their homes, if they've been in them for a while and are able to get $2 million, I don't think that they should have to give the city even more money over and above what the state's going to take, what the city is already going to take. So I think we should be looking at home ownership here in terms of, I don't think that homeowners should be subject to this here. But like I said, I am interested to see how we're tying this into our seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Council President Flynn will be followed by Councillor Fernandez Anderson. Council President Flynn, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Councilor Arroyo for holding the hearing, to Mayor Wu for her leadership, but also to our colleague Councilor Edwards as well for her important work on this issue for many years, along with former Mayor Janey. We're in a housing crisis, so we need to figure out different ways to fight displacement, have more affordable housing to help middle-class families, communities of color, immigrants, our seniors, and persons with disabilities stay in the city of Boston. Housing advocates have noted that a transfer fee would help low-income residents and the middle class as well. Having a real estate transfer fee not only helps us get more funding for affordable housing, it can also curb real estate speculation. I was supportive of the home rule petition on a transfer fee that was filed by Councilor Edwards and Janey. So I'm interested to learn more about this version of the legislation, which I certainly support. And just finally, when it comes to this conversation about property tax relief in our seniors, I think it's also important to acknowledge many who are also renting out apartments in their triple deckers below market rates to their neighbors, to their family, and to people in need as well. That is a critical piece of affordable housing that often goes under the radar in many Boston neighborhoods, including my own neighborhood in South Boston. I would like us to take a look at seeing how we can provide some relief for longtime residents and somehow for those who provide below market rent to their neighbors and who want to keep families in the city. They want to keep families in the city, and they know that these families don't have the financial means to stay in the city. So what they're doing is they're giving them a break on the rent. So there should be a place for those residents in the city of Boston as well, along with our seniors, along with our persons with disabilities and immigrant communities as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, President Flynn. I'm going to go to Councilor Lara for an opening statement, and then we can start with the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I am really excited to be here today, and I think that this is a really important step towards meeting the housing crisis with the urgency that is necessary. I think that this is a good first step, and we have lots of work to do. And as the chair of the Housing Committee, I'm excited to hear from folks and also work on implementing this with all of my colleagues and the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you. And for folks who will now go to the panel, I see that we have here with us Chief Sheila Dillon, the Chief of Housing for the City of Boston, Tim Davis, the Deputy Director of Policy at the Mayor's Office of Housing, Nicholas Arniello, and now's a good time to correct me so I don't keep saying your name wrong, the Commissioner of Assessing, and Commissioner Emily Shea of the H-Star Commission. I don't know who or if you're going to have one person present or if you're all presenting, but at this point, the floor is yours. Is it somebody muted? Is
She will be presenting first. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. So thank you so much for having us, Chairman Arroyo, for holding this really important hearing and doing it so quickly. For the record, my name is Sheila Dillon, and I'm Chief of Housing for the City of Boston. As mentioned, my colleagues and I are here to present an overview of the home rule petition filed by Mayor Wu, an act relative to real estate transfer fees and senior property tax relief. Tim Davis, Deputy Director for Policy and Research, will give an overview of the transfer fee portion of this legislation and what it would yield. Really happy to be here with Tax Assessor Nick Arniello, who's going to provide an overview of the changes to 41C, and Emily Shea here to talk about how both of these components would really help our seniors. And before I hand it over to Tim, I'm going to state the obvious, what we all know to be true. There are too many of our residents that are struggling with housing. And I just want to state a couple of facts just to put things in context. So there are currently 15,000 seniors in our city that are renting a home and that are tax burdened. I mean, they're paying more than 30% of their income, often fixed income, on housing. There are 60,000 non-senior households that are rent burdened using that same measure. Talking to Kate Bennett yesterday, wanted to get an update on the wait list at the BHA. It's over 40,000 people are on the BHA wait list. And we know for families to build wealth and for them to stay in the neighborhoods that they love, we need to build more affordable home ownership. And on any given night in the city of Boston, there are 900 individuals that are homeless. And at the last census, there were 900 families living in Boston family shelters. So you all know these, you all live these, we all get the calls, the stories, but we need so badly to increase our increase ongoing revenue streams so we can build the affordable housing that we need and have. And I do want to thank you all. A lot of you have been in this fight for a long time, and we have made progress. I don't want to be all doom and gloom today. We have increased, especially over the last several years, the amount of our budget, our city budget that's going into housing development and housing programs. With many of your help, we We passed CPA, which has provided us an ongoing revenue stream. We go after every state and federal dollar that we can to build housing and use that money for our housing programs. Last year, we increased the linkage payments, and we're now doing a study to see if we can increase it further. So there's a lot of good work being done. And like I said, many of you are involved in this work. But I think when you see Tim's slide, the transfer fee, and it impacts so few people here in the city, but it could provide so much resource for our programs. It really is worth fighting for. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim. Before I do that, thank you, Tim, for putting up this slide. So it may come up, what do we spend right now on housing development? And this isn't, what I didn't capture here, but I can certainly get to you. I didn't capture the BHA, the resources they get through the capital budget. But this is what we use, the Mayor's Office of Housing, to build and preserve affordable housing every year. And you'll see that the sources I just listed total, like last year, they totaled $71 million. Now that's a lot of money, but given the cost of land, the cost of construction, how difficult it is to build and preserve affordable housing in the city, we know that this number is inadequate and we need to do more. But I did want to level set here and just provide you with the number of what we spent last year on the creation and preservation of affordable housing. And when you see that 71 number, now I'll go, and Tim will talk to you about what the transfer fee could raise. I think you'll just see the importance of us working with our state legislature and you all to pass this very important bill. So with that, I really want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to hand it over to Tim, who's going to outline the transfer fee portion of this legislation. Thanks.
Sorry for the technical issues here. I can't share the whole screen, so I'm doing what I think I can to show you this slide as best as possible. So the transfer fee on real estate transactions will provide much needed revenue for affordable housing and housing stability programs. It exempts the first $2 million of any real estate transaction. This is different from the 2019 version, which was passed by this body, which covered all transaction. It covered the entire value of a transaction of $2 million or more. As with the 2019 version, it does allow for a fee of up to 2%. That would be, that specific percentage would be defined by ordinance after the legislature passes it by this body. It also enables the city of Boston by ordinance to make other exemptions, including for affordable housing developments and vulnerable populations, such as our low-income seniors. Based on 2021 sales, a 1% transfer fee would have raised a one-year total of almost $45 million, and a 2% fee would have raised $99.7 million. Looking also at the 2021 numbers, it would have affected only 704 transactions across the city. Most of these transactions are in downtown neighborhoods and on high-priced condominiums, and also on some of our larger transactions, including if a commercial building is sold, so an office building is sold, we would get this transfer fee. If a large apartment building was sold, we would get the transfer fee. So it does affect those kinds of properties as well, not just residential properties. To cover the 41C, I will turn it over to the assessing commissioner.
Thank you, Tim. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm trying a new microphone setup. Good? Okay. Appreciate that. And Councilor Arroyo, you did a much better job on my name the second time, so I appreciate that as well. It's Arenello, but you were by far not the first person to pronounce it differently, so no worries.
That second I, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Now I can get your name right. Names are important to me, so Arenello, gotcha. Thank you.
I appreciate that. So yeah, I think the administration is really excited about the revisions that we've made to the transfer fee. And in particular, one of those revisions is adding in this provision about kind of updating and altering our 41C exemption program. So this is an exemption program that already exists within the city for our seniors, and it provides some much needed relief. They get up to, presently in its current form, seniors can get up to $2,000 off of their property taxes, which when combined with the residential exemption is just a huge, huge chunk of money, and really makes that a much less of an issue in terms of when they're looking at their overall cost for the year and the different things that they need to pay for. It's a program that is targeted currently towards very low income seniors that have very few assets in reserve. And so what we want to do is we want to update that program, not only increasing the amount of the exemption so that the base goes from $1,000 to $1,500, and the total potential exemption goes from $2,000 to $3,000. But we also really want to revise the income limits and kind of peg those to something that can move over time, so that the program is really doing what it's supposed to do. So currently, the asset limits for a single applicant is just under $25,000, which is about 26.5% of area median income, which is a really low threshold. And for a married couple, the income limit is just under $38,000, which is around 35% of area median income. We'd like to change both of those figures, and we'd like to, instead of having them be fixed targets, we'd like to tie them specifically to the city's area median income. And so they would shift to be 50% of area median income for both individuals and married couples. And so for the next applicable fiscal year, if this goes into effect, that would change the income threshold for single individuals. That would raise that up to $47,000, since it's almost doubling it. And for a married couple, it would go up to $53,700. These are, I think, really significant changes, but it's not just the one-time increase. It's that we'd be pegging it to something that will move over time. And so it wouldn't be something that we would have to constantly revisit. We also are interested in changing the asset limits, because right now there's some pretty strict asset limits on what people can have to qualify for the program. And that's $40,000 in assets if you're single, and $55,000 if you're married. It doesn't include the value of the home that you live in, but it includes a whole bunch of your other, your bank accounts, retirement accounts, things like that. So we'd like to increase those as well. We'd like to double them. So we'd raise the assets for single family households to $80,000 and for married applicants to $110,000. So really we're changing all the elements of the program to be something that we think really makes more sense for the area. And, you know, we feel like it makes sense to have this kind of conversation while we're talking about the transfer tax, we're talking about housing affordability. And so this seemed like kind of the right package. I'd also like to reiterate something that Tim mentioned that I think is really important to keep in mind. And I hope might address one of the concerns that Councilor Baker brought up. The change to the transfer tax legislation of having it only apply to amounts over $2 million, that's a pretty dramatic change. And so that basically means that if someone has a property that does appreciate in the future, and, you know, right now it's worth $1.9 million, next year it sells for $2.1 million, the transfer fee would only apply to that $100,000 over the $2 million. It wouldn't apply to the entire amount. And that makes it a much more progressive program and not regressive. And also the current exclusion of $2 million really does take the vast majority of individual housing units out of the equation entirely. So it really is a program that is addressing larger scale properties. Now I'd like to pass it over to Commissioner Shea.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Commissioner. Hi, Chairman Arroyo and council members. It's great to see everybody on here. We support at the H Strong Commission both the transfer tax and the changes to the 41C exemption. So like you, we see every day older adults in need of affordable housing or having trouble meeting all their expenses, including their property taxes. Many older adults in Boston are facing challenging financial situations, as you know, and all too often, the generation that made our cities and communities the thriving places they are today are forced to choose between paying housing costs, paying for food, and paying for medications. In fact, for people over the age of 65 and living independently in Boston, 74% of individuals and 44% of elder couples in Boston have incomes below the elder index, meaning they have less income than it costs them to live in the city. So for those reasons, it's really important that we do everything possible to maximize the amount of funding we have for affordable housing, and the transfer fee is a great step that gives us another funding stream. And also the proposed changes to the elder exemption are critical and will modernize this program, bringing a much needed expansion of older residents who qualify. So I'm just here to say that we very much support these. We're really excited about this proposal, and we encourage the City Council to move it forward. I also want to thank you for all of your support and advocacy for older adults and for others needing assistance in the community. And we really look forward to the day when we can work together with you to educate people about these changes and encourage older adults to apply for the 41C exemption. So thanks so much. I guess, so that wraps up our panel, and I think we're happy to take any questions that folks have.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. With that, I'm going to go. I just want to note that we've been joined by Councilor Murphy. And I'm going to go in order of appearance for the questions, which means we'll be starting with Councilor Edwards, going to Councilor Louis-Jean, then going to Councilor Braden. I'll give folks a heads up as we go through it so that they can prepare. But Councilor Edwards, the floor is yours. We'll go to Councilor Louis-Jean. When Councilor Edwards, when you're ready, just put a hand up and we'll go to you. Councilor Louis-Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the commissioners for your presentation. Just a question about the senior tax relief. Is there anything under 41C that limits us from continuing to increase the eligibility requirement at AMI? Right now, the proposal is 50%, but if we wanted, if we wanted to explore what it would look like to raise that threshold, do we have statutory authority under 41C to do so?
Thank you for that question. So currently, we have no authority to change these limits at all. Under the current laws, everything is presently maxed out. And so that's part of the reason for putting this proposal forward is to have a legislative change so we can alter some of those figures. We weren't thinking about putting forward a proposal that would kind of give us the flexibility to make it different over time. We were kind of thinking that it made sense to move it from this fixed amount currently to tag it to area median income. But if it were, the 50% number seemed like such a giant increase over what it is presently, but then also still serving kind of a population that's struggling. So that's kind of why we chose that number, but I suppose it's possible to discuss whether other numbers would make sense as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just because we've seen a lot of issues with AMI and it not, being more inclusive than just the city of Boston. I think that we could capture a larger swath of folks who are struggling with property taxes and struggling with the number of assets they have. So just, there is flexibility there on that 50% number. It's what I was curious about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. Councilor Braden will be followed by Councilor Mejia, but Councilor Braden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question about the transfer fee, if it would apply to nonprofit institutions. I know that In particular, the Catholic Church has a lot of land holdings, and they divest themselves. They sell off the land for development, and that was just a question. The other issue, I'm really delighted. I have to say, this is a really incredible initiative, and I'm really, really glad to see it's back on the table again, and that we're trying to get it passed as a home rule petition. And I'm hopeful that we're going to make it this time, and I think it's absolutely necessary. I'm wondering, in terms of its application to commercial properties, I know that in this neighborhood, many developers have it's part of their business plan is that they permit sites, they develop a site, they get permitting for a development, and then they immediately flip the project. So will this apply to projects that are permitted projects as well as completed, fully occupied projects? And those are my two questions.
So I will attempt to answer that question in terms of in the implementation, meaning after this passes the legislature, the city council then would pass an ordinance implementing it, and it could then at that time exempt certain kinds of property types, whether it may be a sale by a nonprofit, a sale to an affordable housing development, which could also be exempted. In terms of selling a project, which is your last part of the question, if there is an actual transaction of the property, that property would have the transfer fee. So if they purchased the property for $1 million, they got it in entitlements from the zoning board or the zoning commission, and then sold it for $3 million, then that value above the $2 million would be taxed on that transaction. So yes, that would cover those as well.
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brighton. Councillor Mejia, who will be followed by Councillor Bach. Councillor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's here. Really do appreciate your thorough responses, so much so that some of the questions that I had lined up had already been answered. So I just have a few. The home rule petition says that the transfer fees will be used to further, quote unquote, housing acquisitions, affordability, creation, preservation, senior home, stability, low income, renter stability, et cetera. Can you just go into a little bit more detail about how you see these funds being used? How specifically will they be allocated? And are there any of these a higher priority than the other? And then I'm just curious, when we say creation of affordable housing, are we referring to developing new real estate or designating existing units as affordable? And the last question is, under exempt transfers, it states that certain types of transfers may be defined by an ordinance at a later date. Do you have any insight on how we may be defining something like, quote unquote, transfer of convenience? Can you just provide some input around that?
Yeah, I'll start and then hand over the last question to Tim. But thank you. It's a very good question. The majority of these funds will go into the Neighborhood Housing Trust for distribution through competitive funding rounds, and the City Council has a seat on that. That body, it has a lot of neighborhood representation. It runs really well. We did, though, put language in there that you mentioned, a portion of the fees. It gives us some flexibility if we felt that our seniors needed to receive some of these funds outside of the Neighborhood Housing Trust for housing stabilization. So we just wanted to leave a little bit of flexibility and not have everything go into the trust, because the trust is for the creation and preservation of affordable housing. So we would certainly, if this passes, and we're so hopeful that it does, we'd be coming back to the City Council and really working through these details. I'll hand it over to Tim on the other question.
Yes, I believe the question is about a transfer of convenience. Typically, those are done as almost non-monetary transactions. So they wouldn't probably be covered by this ordinance anyway. They would be exempt just because of the low dollar value. However, we would look at language in the implementation stage to assure that if there is such a transfer of convenience, that we cover that we're being thoughtful about the language so that owners are not using it as a loophole to get around the tax.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Bach, the floor is yours, followed by Councilor Worrell.
Thank you so much, Councilor Arroyo. And I wanted to also give a shout out to Mass Senior Action, who came and were like just very vocal and great about sharing stories about the way that the senior property tax burden can really hit some of their more vulnerable members. And so I just I want to flag that they were before us in February and March saying, among other things, could we make some kind of change to 41C? So and you know, I shared those notes with the administration, so I appreciate them making good on that and taking up that cause. I guess a quick question on that, Nick, is just, do we have, I'm well aware that like trying to figure out exactly what the number of people who are served by an exemption is going to be is tricky, right? Like a program like this, because they haven't applied for it yet. But obviously we do have some kind of statistical data in the city. And so I'm just wondering how and to what extent you've been able to put a number on what we think the likely lost tax revenue and the number of people who this might expand to be able to serve. And this is also obviously connected to Councillor Lujan's point about sort of the question of like, you know, how do you get that? I agree with you that pegging it at an AMI level is going to make this much more evergreen than the current thing, where those current numbers are so low that there's almost no seniors who are going to both own property and be making, you know, that 26 to 32 AMI, even if they're on fixed income. So I'm just sort of curious what our data backup is there and what we think we know, because I think setting it at an AMI is a good thing, but I do think, like to my colleague's point, we won't be able to frequently go back and change what that AMI number is. So we should feel comfortable that it's a AMI number that will serve a decent number of folks, obviously without undermining the tax base.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Councillor Bach. So we do not have amazing data on the potential population that this would apply to, in part because there are so many different overlapping factors to qualification. So it's not just age, it's not just income, it's age, income, and an asset level, and home ownership, right? And so having all of those things overlap, we don't have like a good data set to identify that. Tim and Chief Dillon's group did some digging and found some numbers about just looking at seniors and income levels. And we feel that from that data that this should basically double the amount of potential applicants. So the figures that they have for income only and not getting into housing ownership, not getting into assets, would show that this would potentially impact, it goes from about 4,600 homeowners to 8,700 homeowners. And the reason that I want to stay away from those numbers is like the current people actively in the program is in the hundreds, not in the thousands. And we don't think that that's due to like a failure of outreach. We think that that's due to just the criteria is so limiting. But we think that we can kind of extrapolate that if you just look at those income numbers and that income change would approximately double the amount of potential applicants, then it would just, in essence, double the amount of applicants that we have now that are successfully getting the program. And so that would go from, you know, around 500 to around 1,000. So we think that that is a pretty significant change. And I completely understand the argument that more can be done. But we do like to be a little bit careful with property taxes and exemptions, since if we give money to somebody, then someone else is paying for that. And property taxes are such a huge part of our funding source that if we give everyone an exemption, that becomes problematic.
No, thanks so much, Nick. That's helpful and on a scale front. And yeah, obviously the net of how much this raises for affordable housing, you know, like we want to, it's both a question of what the transfer fee raises and then also a question of what's the tax allowance that we're making to support these seniors. So I certainly agree with you that you want it to be well targeted on that front because everything the city does basically is paid for by property tax. On the transfer fee, just a clarification. So because I know you guys put up the numbers of sort of what it would raise if we were at 1% and what it would raise if we were at 2%. So the language of the legislation is up to 2%, right? So am I right in understanding that it would be set by ordinance, kind of what we were doing within that range?
Yes, in other words, as part of the implementation ordinance, this body in cooperation with the mayor could decide that it's 1.5% or that it's 1% or it's 1.2%. So it is up to 2%. So that 99.7 million figure was the upper reaches of what it would be based on 2021 sales.
Got it. And the 2% number, isn't that what Nantucket uses? There's a few existing transfer fees in the state, and I remember them hovering around 2%.
I think that they are currently at 0.5% and they're seeking 2%.
Seeking, okay. All right, yeah.
Yes.
But I know obviously 2% is something that's a transaction fee on sales in much of Charlestown because of the BPDA history and such. So, okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that was going to be in the ordinance. So yes. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'll just say, I think, you know, this is really creative legislation. I think this is one of those things where, like, if you pull or you push too much on any given element of it, you know, you reduce the amount you're raising, but you also help relieve other people. So it's obviously a balancing act. And I just appreciate the work that the team's put into trying to balance a bunch of different factors here and think about moving us forward. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Edwards will then be followed by Councilor Worrell. Councilor Edwards, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure, and again, I appreciate all of the back and forth and the sense of urgency from the administration. Might I ask that we consider, in terms of the implementation, a step up of the percentage based on how much more over $2 million. So for example, if it's between $1 million over the 2 million. So it's sold for $3 million. So we're talking about within the range of the first 1 million, it's 0.5%. If it's higher than that, it's 1%. And if it's higher than that, like if you could think of a step up that the full 2% might apply to only projects that are really $5 million and more, which not over the 2, but in total. So just, I'm curious, I think that would be helpful. And I think that might calm some of the folks in the real estate community down, that it's not a flat 2% over everything over $2 million. So might want to consider a grading up. So 1 million, so on and so forth. I also think that, and I don't know if Councilor Flaherty is here, but if he and I were speaking about this just casually, one idea that he had was also potentially increasing the $2 million basis so that after the first 5 years or that there would be something that goes back to the $2 million. If our real estate market is continuing to heat up at this level, would it make sense to say that in 5 years, we'll look at whether the $2 million, the first 2 million should be exempt? Maybe it should go to $2.5 million, the first 2.5 to be exempt. So increasing what is exempt over time while also having a step up over that. I think, again, these are just the balancing portions that I think are worth looking at. Again, exempting 100% affordable housing developers from this fee in any way, shape, or form. I don't think if you're going to be housing people and whatever percentage you think makes sense. So if it's incentivizing us to go to 60 to 70% affordable units, if someone purchases it and does that, maybe that there should be an exemption for that. You don't pay any fee. So I would like to hear about the impact of there's two impacts. I think Councilor Bach was talking about the bottom line impact when you are both increasing a tax fee or having a transfer fee, but also increasing the tax exemptions. You really wonder what the net I guess what the net gain is for the city, if you're exempting more people from paying taxes and seniors. So I'm wondering what that net ultimately is. Personally, I think it's all positive gain in terms of housing stability. So being able to keep seniors in their homes and being able to keep or increase the amount of subsidy. And by the way, the Neighborhood Housing Trust for folks, I sit on it now, it does all sorts of things. But one of the biggest groups of people who come to the Neighborhood Housing Trust are developers. Developers come to the Housing Trust to actually ask for money to subsidize so they can build more affordable housing. So I just want people to know this, many of the people who might be opposing this or concerned about it are going to be the first ones in line to ask for the money to pay to buy down the affordability in their buildings. So this is going into development. This is a pro-development transfer fee. This is not going to stop it. This is actually going to make development more affordable. And then finally, I'm hoping that the administration has reviewed the October 2019 report. If you recall, the administration commissioned a report about the original proposal for a transfer fee. And in it, it specifically was asked, what is the impact on the real estate market? And at that time, in that report that the Washington administration commissioned, they found that it was negligible. A 2% fee was negligible impact on the sales and the real estate market in 2019, based on how things were going. I personally don't need to commission a whole new report to see what this would do. If a full on 2% for the entire 2 million was going to have a negligible effect, this is even less applicable. So I just think it's worth us though remembering though that we have done the report, we have done the analysis on the impact of the real estate market, and I could send that out to Chair Arroyo if you'd like. I don't know, maybe for historical purposes and for all of the counselors, and of course the administration would already have it. But it's worth us noting we've already studied the impact of a transfer fee on real estate here in Boston. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Worrell will be followed by Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the administration for their presentation. Just have a few questions. Who will oversee the transfer fee at the closing of a property, and how will this be enforced?
Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll get that. Thank you, Councilor, for that question. It's an important one. There's already a similar fee in Nantucket and in Martha's Vineyard, and there is basically an office where the closing attorney basically goes to that office, pays the fee, gets a certificate, and then goes to the registry. We would have a similar system here. On Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, they are separate offices from the town because they have, it's a special basically fund. Here in the city of Boston, it would be something they would basically go to a window at City Hall, just like you would for property taxes, and be able to pay it on the spot there and then get your certificate and go to the registry.
All right, thank you. And then for seniors, how will we be ensuring they can leave the homes they own to their children? How will this impact potential fees on inheritance?
So Tim, you can answer this, but transfers to family members, correct? I think we can flesh that out in the ordinance, but we can define better sales between family members and potentially exempt.
I would just like to add that as written, if you leave your property to your children as part of your inheritance, or you leave it as part of a trust, that is not going to be a transaction that's going to occur that's going to be over $2 million. So even without defined language, which is in here excluding family transfers, even without that, people don't leave property to their relatives and also pay for it. So it would not be something that is impacted by this.
And then my last question is, do we have an idea by district or neighborhood, or even citywide, on the yearly market appreciation rate?
Yes. We do have that information. We can get that over to you. Yes. Be glad to do that, Counselor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. It's going to go to Councilor Baker now, followed by President Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just are we looking at two home rule petitions here? How does 41C and a transfer tax? Is that one? Are we talking about one home rule petition, or is there two here?
It's one home rule petition. We go up to the State House as one.
Why are we doing it like this? Why isn't it a standalone transfer tax, which it's going to be difficult on the members of the State House to vote on a tax here now in an economy where inflation rates are up around 7 or 8%, where with the rates to get money are on their way up. Why wouldn't we separate these two out and have the transfer tax and then the 41C exemption? It seems like we're trying to kind of massage our way through this. If anybody wants to answer that one there, what is the reasoning behind pairing these together?
I mean, I'll just give it a whirl. I think both issues were very, very important to the administration, to many of us. So we thought packaging them, one, it would make it a more popular home rule and certainly a more popular piece of legislation for the State House to vote on. So we thought it made sense to pair them together for both because they both impact housing stability, and we think it has a better chance of success at the State House.
But I think it's. I'm not comfortable with it. I think they should be separated out. I think we should have a transfer tax and let people vote on a tax, and then helping out our seniors for 41C. I think they really should be bifurcated. It looks like, I mean, more popular application here. I don't know if it's about popularity. Councilor Edwards had spoke about this is making development more affordable. How she come up with that? That's pretty interesting. And also the impact study, which was a couple years ago, which now again inflation going up to levels it hasn't seen since 1982. We're actually going into an economy here now, and the more layers we, as the city council, as city government, the more layers we put on. Basically the engine that we pay for our entire city with, I think it's a mistake. I think in a working session, we should really be talking about how we bifurcate these and two separate home rule petitions. So that's kind of a comment we can get into in our working sessions. And I just want to thank Nick for the clarification on this. It makes it a little bit easier to swallow that, if we're looking at tax over 2 million. So yeah, I just wanted to make those couple of points. I do think we should look at this seriously here. It's not about, I don't think you can tie the two of them together. Yeah, maybe one has something to do with the other. If it was a transfer tax that was going to go directly into helping our seniors, then I'm on board. This here looks like an attempt to kind of put a shine on something with the layering the seniors on top of. So just some thoughts. And Sheila, as always, thank you for doing what you do. I'm good, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Flynn. President Flynn will be followed by Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, who will be followed by Councilor Lara, who will be followed by Councilor Murphy. So that's the order for the rest of this. President Flynn, the floor is yours. You're muted, President Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last year, I highlighted or called for a hearing on property tax relief for our seniors in creating another exemption for longtime residents, especially those 55 years or older and that own their home for 20 years. I know I talked to you about that, Nick, in the past, and maybe we can talk offline about that. But my question to Sheila, again, thank you, Sheila, for being with us, for your important leadership. So Sheila, the money that would be collected, it would go for affordable housing but you and I also worked on many issues over the last 4 years about tenants facing displacement, especially seniors and persons with disabilities, immigrant residents facing displacement. Would this money also be used for seniors facing displacement, eviction, in many of these large apartment buildings, such as Chinatown, that I've been working on this issue with you, Sheila, for many years? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No, it's a very good question, and we have been working on a lot of senior cases lately. The vast majority would go to create and preserve affordable housing through the Neighborhood Housing Trust. But we did write the legislation and the home rule in such a way that a portion of the funding could be used for senior home stability, giving us some flexibility to use funds to help seniors pay their rent, court fees, help them relocate if they need to, utilities perhaps. I think those details need to be fleshed out, but the home rule petition does allow some flexibility for the funds to be used to assist seniors in housing stability.
Okay, thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Tim, and your team. I think that's important because a lot of our efforts are spent helping seniors stay in their current apartment building. And as you mentioned in your opening comment, Sheila, we have a huge waiting list at BHA, and that doesn't move fast enough if we're not able to keep these seniors and persons with disabilities in these apartments. They will be applying for BHA apartments, but the problem is, as we all know, there's a huge BHA waiting list. So this work that we do is very important, but it's also important that we try to help the seniors that are currently also living in here, persons with disabilities, immigrants, so that they can actually stay here as well. So again, just want to say thank you to the city councilors, want to say thank you to the mayor's team as well, and good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, President Flynn. I'm going to go to Councilor Fernandez Anderson.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask about the funds in terms of senior housing, just to expound on Councilor President Flynn's point. In terms of senior care and housing, how innovatively can we use the funds to actually integrate services such as mental health in housing developments for seniors?
I think I'll just try to answer it. I think in two ways, and it could be fleshed out too if this passes, we have an executive order. But when we build a senior housing, or we build housing in general, just for all populations, it's really important that we put enough subsidy in, that there is enough money in the operating budget that we can also have very robust resident services. So the more we can subsidize our affordable housing, our supportive housing as well, it does give flexibility for the owners and managers to provide services. With seniors, I think, especially with senior housing, we are seeing a lot of good developments lately, really pair senior services, including mental health, medical services with stable housing. I think one thing we haven't explored is, and I think I would love to do that with you or others that are interested, is really look at seniors that are living in market rate housing or seniors that are living alone currently in homes that they own. And we focus very much on their housing needs, but we don't necessarily focus as much, and maybe Emily could speak to this, on their mental health needs, especially. I mean, it's been a very difficult couple of years. So we could certainly explore using some of these funds to provide support services for seniors living in market rate housing or their own homes. Emily, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would just add that that certainly We have some resources for older adults who are living with mental health issues or experiencing kind of challenging times, but certainly not enough. It's something that we need to really focus on. At the Age Strong Commission, we're hiring our first behavioral health manager, and we're really grateful to you all and the council and the mayor for putting extra money in our budget for that. We're excited to see that the Public Health Commission is hiring a chief behavioral health officer, and we're really looking forward to figuring out how we expand services for this population. It's critical, and it's one of our priorities here at the Age Strong Commission.
Thank you, Chief Dillon, Chief Shay. Thank you so much. I would love to collaborate and sort of iron that out or think through ideas. Currently working on a program right now. And thank you, Council President. I'm so sorry. Chair, I have to run off to press conference, but thank you so much, everyone.
No worries. Thank you. Councilor Lara, followed by Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I have very little questions in terms of the implementation. I think that my colleagues asked a lot of the questions that I had about the home rule petition, and a little, some of the nitty gritty things will come out in the ordinance creation process. And so I think that I will hold some of my more technical questions about implementation for that time. I will say that as the representative of District 6, this is a home rule petition that I am incredibly supportive of. We have almost 10,000 people in between Jamaica Plain and West Roxbury and Rosendale in our district who are over 65. And I also represent a district, particularly Jamaica Plain and Eggleston Square, who in the last decade has been ravaged by displacement and gentrification. And so I think that the pairing of both the transfer fee and the senior exemption, the expansion of the senior expansion program is something that I am supportive of, because I know that it's going to have a direct impact on the residents of my district. I think that it's a very, thinking about the demographics of our city and the impact that displacements have had on the city. It was a very smart idea to pair them together. I am supportive of keeping them together. I think that it does make it a more attractive home rule petition. And I think that in terms of strategy, it was a good choice. So I think that we should keep it like that. I think it's representative and reflective of the needs of the people in my district. And so I just want to commend you for the work that you're doing, and I'll get some more of my questions in the ordinance process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. Councilor Murphy, and then I'll ask some questions. And I see two hands up, hand up for Councilor Mejia, a hand up for Councilor Edwards. I don't know if that's old or new, but we will do a quick second round. So if any of the councilors have follow-up questions, please raise your Zoom hand, and then I'll go to you after I go. Councilor Murphy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for holding this meeting, and for all of the panelists. I don't have any other questions. I do want to thank my colleagues. Going last is either good or bad, right? But everyone asked some great questions, and definitely have some things to think about leaving this meeting, but I'm glad that this conversation has started, and I look forward to continuing this work. My mom, my aunts, I have many seniors in my life who own, my aunt owns a 3-family, like lots of different issues where displacement is real, and taxes and the rising costs for seniors and displacement is something I care a lot about. So thank you for this, and I look forward to continuing working with my colleagues and everyone involved in this important work.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. And now I'll just ask, many of my questions were already asked. I just think it's important for folks who are listening, who have followed this. This is not a new home rule petition. It's actually gone through several sort of variations and versions. In 2019, I believe the council passed this. This was prior to me joining the council, but I believe the council passed this unanimously. What are the differences from the 2019 version to this version?
So thank you, Councilor, for that question. The major difference is that we, instead of $2 million being the trigger where all of the value receives a tax or the fee on that entire purchase or sales price, it will exempt the first $2 million of the purchase price. That's the major change here that we're looking at today in terms of the fee. But of course, the other change is, of course, pairing it with the senior tax exemption program as well.
And so just in layman terms, in that sense, then the 2019 was actually a stiffer tax than the one that we're looking at now.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so the 2019 one that passed unanimously actually took more dollars on that tax hit than this one here.
That's correct.
And how much do we have some idea? I know some folks have asked about that, but how much are we talking about when we talk about the difference in projected revenue?
Yes, so based on 2021 sales, we would, if for the 1% fee, we would have gotten a little bit less than $64 million instead of a little bit less than $50 million. So there's about a $14 million change. And at 2%, that's about a $28 million change in what we would get for receipts.
And then how much has the property values in the city of Boston changed since 2019 to now? Do we have some idea of how much folks' properties have gone up? I know we're sort of in a bubble. So in other words, if you were in the home speculation or in the flipping home market, even though it's a pretty rough economy in other ways, that part of it certainly has gone up. And so what are we talking about for folks in the city of Boston from 2019 to 2022? How much of an evaluation, a raise in sort of the values of homes are we seeing right now?
There have been substantial increases in prices over the last 2 years. And from 2019 to 2021, for property types that are condos through 3 families, we're looking at an overall increase of about 7.5% during that time period.
Okay, so basically what we're saying is we passed this unanimously in 2019 at a higher tax rate. Now it's at a lower tax rate, but those folks are actually seeing 7.5% increases in the values of the property, give or take on average?
Over the 2 years, over the 2-year period. So, yes.
Okay. And then this then went through like another change, another variation that I believe was last year under Mayor Janey. What's different from the version that she put forward in this version before us today?
Her version had a $3 million exemption instead of $2 million, but it did not have the senior property tax exemption.
Okay, so basically the senior exemptions got added in. So we got a lower tax base, and then we have that separate thing with the senior exception added to this.
That's correct.
That's what's made this package. And just as a question, because I don't know the answer to this, has the senior tax exemption ever come before the body before? Is that a new thing that we've just added for this particular home rule petition, or is that something that we've sent up at some other time separately?
Nick, do you know?
So I don't know off the top of my head the last time that we made a change. There are various times throughout the years that we do tweak our exemption programs and make changes, and some of them are within the confines of the statutes, and some of them are changing the statutes completely for Boston. I know we've maxed out this program, this 41C program, under the current state laws, but I don't know off the top of my head when that last was approved. That approval would have gone through the city council. I just can't remember what year that would have been.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. And then I noticed that this version allows for the state legislature to make changes to the form and substance in line with general objectives, rather than the 2019 version that got sent up that only allowed them to make sort of clerical changes. What is the thinking on that?
We always debate this, and I'm sure you all do too. We're very anxious to get something passed, and sometimes it takes tweaking, a proposed bill to get it over the finish line. So I think we wanted to provide some flexibility to the state legislature. I don't have a better answer than that, but it is something we always debate. We just don't want something voted up and down if it could be changed slightly, and we could get something passed.
Okay, but just to be clear for the council, basically the inclusion of that means that what we send up could change drastically if the House decides they sort of want to get involved in tweaking this one way or the other. So it could become, you know, based on what our views are and what's a better or worse bill, it could become better or worse at the House because they're able to either increase that tax or change the threshold or sort of tinker with it substantively. I'm seeing nodding heads, so I'm assuming that's just a yes across the board. Okay. And then I'm going to go in the order I saw the hands go up. Councillor Louis Jen, followed by Councillor Baker. Councillor Louis Jen, floor is yours.
Well, I was taking my hand down. Actually, you asked, thank you, Mr. Chair. You asked the exact same question that I was going to ask, like that flexibility in the language in terms of our ability, the House's ability to change the language of the ordinance. Just curious as to why that was added, because it could be a good thing or a bad thing, as you've explained. But I also just want to note from the change between the 2019 on a $2.1 million property that was sold under the 2019, the city would receive $42,000 in revenue, and under the current proposed change, with a $2 million exemption, we'd only receive $2,000. So that folks can understand in real dollars what that change looks like in terms of revenue that we could obtain from this transfer fee. I just think it's worth noting to be discussed later in working sessions or whatever, but just want to note that.
Thank you, Councilor Lujan. That's actually helpful for me because I was just trying to put my brain around it. Percentages sometimes don't work that well for me. Councilor Baker.
Yeah, just a quick question, Mr. Chair. Are you sure that 2019 vote was unanimous? Do you have it in front of you?
I don't. So actually, that's a good question. It was my understanding that it was unanimous, but you were actually there. Do you know what
I don't think I voted for that. I think that was probably another 12-1 there, but not totally sure. That's why I was curious to see if you had it in front of you.
I was told unanimous, but I might have been incorrect on that, and I appreciate the correction because, as I noted, I wasn't here. I'm just trying to get the history of sort of this document that's in front of us to know how much it's sort of evolved and in what ways. So I appreciate that. We'll look into that, but for the record, don't quote me that it was unanimous. I just know that it passed, and I think it was pretty popular at the time. So I'm just trying to figure out where and what we've changed in that time frame, and whether or not we consider that beneficial or not at this stage. I will say, just on my end, I understand we do struggle with this at the city, at least I do, when we give the state legislature sort of the ability to pull out an eraser and change the things that I may have liked about something and make it different. But I understand why you might want to put that in for a passage, but I do think that's a substantial power in this document. And just to be clear, one final question on my end. We've sent up, I think, 2 different versions of this. They got a 2019 version and 2021 version, correct? At the State House right now?
There is only the 2019 version at the State House, the 2021.
And so would this replace it? So like if this goes up, does this replace that previous version, or are they both sort of living at the State House and they could pick and choose? Like how does that work?
It seems that because you yourself said that the 2019 version did not have the language that gave the State House flexibility, so they would not be substituting the 2022 language for the 2019 language. So they would be 2 separate bills. And we would assume that because if the current council votes for this, and because of the current mayor supporting the new version, that the State House would act on the new version and kind of basically let the old version lapse.
Okay, so that's helpful for me just from a how that would work if it goes up. I don't know if you have any other questions, Councilor Baker, or anyone else who's present before I go to public comment.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. And so for public.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure, but it looks like, I don't know if Councilor Edwards' hand is actually up, but it looks like it's up. I don't know if she had a comment.
I think she's actually at the press conference that is happening right now of the budget. And so if you're there, Councilor Edwards, you can unmute and jump in. But I'm going to go to the public testimony list. And I don't know, now speaking to my central staff that's been incredibly helpful in keeping this moving. I don't know who's here on that list. I'm going to go down the list, the order I have it. But it starts with Richard Giordano. Then it goes to Lydia Lowe, then it goes to Michael Kane, and then we'll go down the rest of the list. But if Richard Giordano is here and I see his hand is up, if you can keep your comments to 2 minutes, say where you're from in the city of Boston or not, and what organization, if any, you represent or are a member of. Thank you.
Chairman Arroyo, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify on Mayor Wu's transfer fee and property tax relief home rule petition. For the record, my name is Richard Giordano. I work at Fenway Community Development Corporation and am representing Fenway CDC in this testimony. I've sent the council our testimony, and I will not repeat it. And in the effort to be brief, because I've been criticized for not being that way before, what I would like to address are other issues regarding who would actually pay the transfer fee and what it would look like. The point needs to be made that much of the real estate in Boston that would be subject to this transfer fee is actually owned by absentee investors, speculators, and flippers. And I'm sorry for characterizing them in that regard, but that's what they are. I will also try to send the council a study that was done by the Institute for Policy Studies 2 years ago on the old transfer fee, which showed the ownership at 1 Dalton and Seaport Pier 4, and how much of it was actually owned by speculators and flippers, and how many hundreds of millions of dollars of sales went through those 2 buildings alone, and how much it would have generated had we had a transfer fee back then. Another thing to look at in our residential neighborhoods is who owns the property and who would pay the fee. And in the case of Mission Hill, unfortunately, the bulk of our real estate has been bought up by absentee investors, speculators, and flippers. I've done a study on Hillside Street in Mission Hill, and out of approximately 120 properties, 47 are owned by LLCs, 23 are owned by trusts. The majority of the properties do not take a residential exemption, and almost the bulk of them, vast bulk, are renting out to students and owned by investors. So what does that mean? The people who would pay the fee more than often, or most often, will be the flippers, the people who are in this for the money and who are not the homeowners we're all concerned about, who we want to keep in the neighborhood. So when we talk about this fee, we really do have to focus on the reality of ownership in the Boston market and who will pay the fee. And this fee would actually, I think, help stabilize places, because maybe flippers will think twice about having to flip. As you know, the issue of housing for students and building dorms is a very topical one, and it's spreading to more and more neighborhoods as the students reach out to lower cost neighborhoods. So in this fee, which would help put in new revenue to produce new affordable housing, we have to see who will pay it and what will happen. So that's one important point. And then another thing to remember is that this fee could be a game changer and could represent almost as much money as what is currently going into the Neighborhood Housing Trust Fund. And we also need to remember that essentially the market, given the current conditions that we're faced with, cannot build the housing that the city of Boston actually needs due to rising costs, due to labor, due to acquisition problems, to financing. The market will produce housing where they can make the most profit, and that's at the luxury end. So how do we produce the housing that we actually need? Is to have extra revenue generated to produce the housing that the market doesn't want to produce, affordable housing. So those are the 2 points. I thank you for the time. Wonderful that the council is looking at this, and I look forward to working with all of you to get this passed at the State House. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giordano. I'm just going to go through the list of folks who signed up for public testimony so that you can raise your hand. But also, if you are an attendee right now and you want to speak and did not sign up, just raise your hand and we'll go right to you. If we can go now to Kath, I see we got Michael Kane already in. So if Michael Kane, if you can go now, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. Thank you all for holding this hearing on a very important home rule petition. For the record, I'm Michael Kane. I'm the director of the Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants. And we have been supporting this kind of tax on transfers proposed in 1980 at the State House. So it's good to see these things are moving now. A few things to say. First of all, there is the previous home rule petition just got a favorable report by the Joint Committee on Revenue, which means it's moving and could along with others, and it could be passed this session. So it's very important to get this home rule petition up there and see if the Joint Committee could also endorse this or replace it as a substitute for the current bill, because that's moving. Secondly, there are other measures that would also increase the real estate transfer fee, notably the HERO, Housing and Environment Revenue and Opportunities Coalition. We're one of the founders of that one, which would double the fee and put the money half into climate and half into housing, the extra money into trust funds at the state level, which means Boston would get a portion of that. Former Councilor Murphy, the current registrar, testified 2 weeks ago that the total amount of revenue generated by the transfer fees actually doubled last year. Went up from 300 million statewide to 600 million, which means the pandemic has not affected the flipping phenomenon and the turnover phenomenon. In fact, it's increased, and that in Boston in particular, as Rich Giordano just mentioned, most of the revenue is actually coming from transfers of very large industrial, commercial, and office properties at the Seaport in downtown Boston. And one example, there was the money that, as Murphy says, is being left on the table. One example is that 101 Seaport in the Seaport district was built by Skanska, a Swedish company, for 142 million in 2013. They flipped it 2 years later to a German company for $450 million. So that's a $300 million increment. So that was all the transfer fee for that was 0.456%. What a wasted opportunity. So these global companies can obviously, that aren't even in the country, obviously can afford to pay a higher fee, and we should tap that at every opportunity. That's what we're talking about getting at here. And the home rule petition is great in that it exempts the first 2 million, meaning almost all homeowners or condo owners are not going to feel this at all. But we want to get at those big monopoly transfers that are, monopoly game transfers that are going on in the Seaport and downtown. Billions and billions of dollars that are trading hands that we're not tapping into. So they can surely afford 2%. I think, frankly, they could afford a lot more. But if 2% would generate another, was the number 90 million a year for Boston, that would be great. And the last thing to point out is that the rule petition does allow the use of funds for low-income renters. And the city has created a city rent subsidy, like a federal Section 8 or state MRVP for low-income renters. We advocated for that with the City Rent Subsidy Coalition. We are hoping the mayor will double it in this year's budget from 5 to 10 million a year. It's currently a pilot at 5 million. But once this gets established, like the Washington, D.C. Local rent subsidy program, this revenue could be a major source of expansion for that program. So if, for example, if Murphy's right and the amount of money is actually going up, then the amount that could be generated extra, let's say it's 120 million a year. If half of that went to a city rent subsidy, that's 6,000 low-income renters that could be assisted on a permanent basis from this source of revenue through the Boston Housing Authority program. So that's very exciting. If we could get thousands of people assisted that currently don't get it, we could largely reduce homelessness and take the pressure off low-income renters in the city. So we strongly support this home rule petition. We're already working on it at the State House from the last one, and the related statewide enabling act from the Transfer Fee Coalition, also complementary. So all of these measures we are supporting at the State House, and we look forward to working with you to get it passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Next is, let me just see who we've got put in here. Next is Lydia Lowe. Thank you. If you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Lydia Lowe. I'm the director of the Chinatown Community Land Trust and also a member of the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network, which is made up of 8 local community land trusts. I just want to speak in support of this home rule petition, as we had also supported the earlier version that was sponsored by Councillor Edwards a couple of years ago. A real estate transfer fee on the transfer of high value properties adds a reasonable fee to transactions, which is not a significant burden and shared by the buyer and seller. It's less than the normal fee for a real estate agent, but the result will be millions of dollars in new revenues that are desperately needed during this housing crisis. And yes, I think this could be a significant game-changing increase on our funds, compared to what is currently a $71 million budget for housing production and preservation. And I particularly want to emphasize, as a representative of the Community Land Trust, the importance of these funds to allow for more funding of housing preservation, keeping people in the homes that they may already have. The Chinatown Community Land Trust and the Greater Boston Community Land Trust we're seeking to stabilize our communities by removing properties from the private market into permanent affordability. Here in Chinatown, we're creating permanently affordable condo units in some of our historic brick row houses. The Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust is working primarily in Dorchester to keep tenants in place by creating permanently affordable rental units. But to do this type of affordable housing preservation work, we often face the dual challenge of prices that have really skyrocketed because of real estate speculation on the one hand, and on the other hand, housing that's badly in need of repair because of a history of disinvestment. So that means that we really need the additional funds for these types of acquisition and for necessary repairs to housing. I also wanted to say that the tax relief for low and moderate income seniors is an important piece of this legislation as well, to ensure that we're helping seniors remain who want to age in place and in community. And we also believe that community land trusts have an important role to play in that work, in working with our senior population on seeking creative ways to keep people in place and also find ways to keep long-time owner-occupied homes as housing stock that can be affordable to low-income and middle-class renters and buyers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowe. Let me just see who they're. I see Mr. Vasile. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Gregory Vasile is here. Mr. Vasile, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. My name is Greg Vassell, and I'm the CEO of the Great Boston Real Estate Board. Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts together is facing a housing crisis. And we want to work with the council and our mayor to help solve this problem. It's very noble also to be thinking of seniors who face constraints with revenue and making ends meet in these very difficult and inflationary times. So we applaud the noble aspect of looking at seniors as well, because that's a very important part of us as an organization too. The Community Preservation Act was passed in the 1990s. And we believe that that is the appropriate way to go is in terms of raising money for affordable housing. A sales tax on housing and buildings is not the way to go. And that's the way we view this proposal. It's clearly a sales tax on housing and buildings. The CPA was passed in the 90s as an alternative to these transfer taxes. Earlier in the hearing, we talked a little bit about Nantucket. Nantucket was passed almost 40 years ago in the early 80s. That was before the CPA was established. With the escalating costs of housing and the costs of increasing of real estate, we think that a sales tax on land and buildings like this will only make the cost of housing more difficult and more unachievable for more people. You look at inflation, you look at the cost of lending, you look at property taxes, which are actually borne more on the commercial side than they are on the residential side, operational costs, new requirements for energy and climate change that are coming down on properties. All these are going to affect properties and they're going to drive costs even more. Adding an additional tax burden to this may tip the balance in Boston. We need housing in Boston. We will support that and we believe that wholeheartedly. But at some point, a developer or owner may decide to take their business elsewhere. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I want to be respectful of my 2 minutes, and we look forward to working with you in working sessions and in the future on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like Melvin Vieira Jr. If you were ready to go, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Councilor Royal and Mr. Chairman, should I say, and also the city council members as well, and the members of this committee. My name is Melvin A. Vieira Jr. I am a real estate agent with Remax Destiny in Boston, and I've been volunteering. I am actually a volunteer member of the Greater Boston Board of Realtors, and I also have the honor to be the president of the real estate division. I live and I've born and raised in Boston for over 30 years. And when I moved back to Boston 25 years ago, I started selling homes, and the price range of the homes were at $25,000 to $100,000. And as time has gone on, the prices have gone up, but that has not put a damper on the demand for homes, especially here in Boston. People who think they're not going to be affected, they will by this proposal, and it will definitely could do harm to them. What the proponents don't understand is that when a house is for sale, it doesn't necessarily mean people are selling because they can make a huge profit. We represent people that are dealing with death, divorce, medical problems, financial issues, and other issues that are personal, emotional, and costly. So on the top of that, these proponents want to penalize them by adding more of a transfer tax. As you heard stated from my Executive Director, Greg Vassell, the transfer tax is the CPA is the way it was and the way things look and the way we've gone about and done things in the past. There's an assumption from these proponents, a very wrong assumption, that every homeowner is selling a home to make hundreds of millions of dollars and for profit. The reality is it's quite opposite. I have represented thousands of sellers over my career, and many people are selling their homes not to walk away with a huge profit. One of the examples that I can give you is I have clients that have sold their homes. Matter of fact, just recently, and it's funny, after I said I sold homes at $25,000, now they're selling them at $1.5 million, 3 families. And that's Dorchester. And if the property values continue to go up in a little while as they are, they could run up over $2 million plus, as you can see. And the thing is, these people are using their money, to over time right now to refinance, to renovate their properties, to redo the repairs, and also to put their children through school, and also possibly pay medical bills. And they're also paying the state stamp tax, and they're also, when they sell, they have the tax gain that they're going to have to hit, and the federal capital gain, as well as normal lifestyle expenses. So if you really look at it, they're not really walking away with that $2 million. Okay, they're going to be walking with a lot less over time, as much money, blood, sweat, and tears that they have put into it. Thinking of those families who will buy and renovate those homes, okay, have worked and created generational wealth. They've improved our housing stock and their house. Why should we have to penalize them for their hard work by purchasing and fixing up and not neglecting their property, which can help make the neighborhood safer, more beautiful? And I say all this is that if they need to buy or sell in the 2 years, why should they be penalized? This could also impact the foreclosure and short sale. Homeowners attempting to avoid foreclosure or selling their home for less than the outstanding mortgage will face new burdens just to sell their home. For those with a little or no equity in their home, these transfer taxes could force sellers to sell for shorter than what that number is. We need to look at a real, true, holistic solution that will lead to a wider range of housing options for Boston, and should not be asked to, and we should not be asked to burden it for the housing and the affordable housing piece alone. I want to thank everybody here for allowing me to testify and speak on it. And we do look forward, as the Greater Boston Board of Realtors and as being the president, to work in the working sessions and to be there for you to answer any questions. And I thank you very much for giving me this time. And I will now go ahead and relinquish my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mike Edwards, the floor is now yours.
Chairman Arroyo and members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Mike Edward, and I'm president of Perry CRE, which is a Boston-based commercial brokerage and consulting firm. I'm here today in my capacity as a volunteer and also as the 2022 treasurer of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. I have over 35 years experience in the commercial real estate industry here in Boston. I think a lot of times when people think of commercial landlords, they always think of the large institutional owners and not often many of the local and regional landlords who also own property here in Boston. You know, passing a real estate transfer tax for that group is counterproductive at any time, but in the middle of a global pandemic, it's especially egregious. You know, we're experiencing a period of uncertainty and caution in the commercial real estate market. Many tenants in these buildings of these small landlords that have struggled to pay the bills during the pandemic have just, you know, as it's worn on, just decided to shut their doors. And that puts pressure on these landlords to keep their mortgage payments going. You know, the average daily office occupancy, people actually coming to the office right now in downtown Boston, is around only 10 to 15%. Commercial landlords have been struggling in the face of, you know, these missed rent payments and eviction moratoria. A tax like this just seems especially onerous to someone who's, you know, hurting and maybe, as Melvin said, even with some of the, you know, residential, you know, they're feeling a pressure to sell maybe in face of foreclosure or even a short sale, and then looking at have to pay this tax, which they will have to pay, because even the smaller landlords, as we know, these office buildings, even on the smaller side, are always well in excess of $2 million in value. You know, the operation of commercial office buildings is a major source of economic activity in Boston. You know, the jobs that these buildings provide, you know, basically have economic benefits flowing as they operate over the years. When a building's being built under construction, you know, the benefits flow to the city, but once that's complete, they stop. Whereas these buildings, you know, provide the economy's vitality. They create new jobs. They contribute year after year to the local tax base. I point to the same thing that Greg Vassal and Melvin did. The Community Preservation Act, I think, is the way to go to fund affordable housing right now. I think it's at 1%, has the ability through the voters to go up to 3%. And I think that's the way that these funds should be raised. The other thing is these taxes, this transfer tax can't be financed. So, it's going to cost thousands of dollars at a closing, either from the buyer or taken from the seller's proceeds. Lastly, I just think a new sales tax would add time, expense, and complication to an already complicated transaction in an especially complicated time right now that we're in as we come out of this, hopefully as we come out of this pandemic. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edwards. If we can now go to Marley Frederic. I don't know if they are here.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to speak today. My name is Marley Frederic, and I am the senior organizer at Boston Tenant Coalition. And the BTC is a coalition of grassroots tenants, neighborhood groups, community development corporations, and homeless and advocacy organizations that promote affordable housing in Boston. We currently anchor CTAB, also known as Coalition for Truly Affordable Boston, and the CAC, which stands for Community Advisory Committee for Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. We were successful in the passage of the IDP linkage home rule last session, working closely with the city and housing and job and labor allies. We are also part of the LOHA Coalition, which stands for Local Option for Housing Affordability, which is the statewide transfer fee coalition, representing a diverse range of cities from Somerville, Cambridge to Concord, Northampton, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. And that has over 80 diverse groups supporting, including most recently Mass General Brigham and the Sheriff's Association. LOHA has a statewide local enabling legislation, as well as 11 home rule petitions currently that have moved out of the House Committee. And we think this is very hopeful news in advancing the Boston's transfer fee bill in the future. Today, the Boston Tenant Coalition would like to announce our support for Mayor Wu's home rule petition. These accumulated funds would raise millions of dollars towards affordable housing, as well as provide property tax relief to senior Boston residents. We all know the exacerbating effects COVID-19 has left on our dire housing crisis. It has ravaged our community and continued to perpetuate displacement of longtime residents, myself included. Today, nearly 50% of Boston's renters, as well as 27% of homeowners, are cost burden, and that is spending more than 1/3 of your income on housing. In Boston, where nearly half the BIPOC population income is mainly at 60% AMI or lower, with equity of $8. This fund provides for projects serving households earning at or below 80% AMI and giving preference to those who have been historically excluded, including housing, including families, seniors, veterans, artists, youth, and people with disabilities. Those funds would prioritize community stabilizing house development by funding the creation and preservation of affordable housing and meeting the desperate housing need in the greater number of low-income households as well as moderate households. Not only would this legislation provide funding for deeply affordable rental units, but if passed, it would expand eligibility to approximately 8,700 senior homeowners who homeowners where almost 50% are severely housing cost burden, and that means paying over 50% of their income. Supporting this legislation will address disparities in housing access and displacement through an equitable and a sustainable source of funding. Again, Boston Tenant Coalition would like to declare our support of the home rule petition, and we look forward to the swift passage in the City Council and then the State House. And thank you for your support, and we look forward to working together to make this a reality. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Karen Chen, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Chairman Arroyo, member of the council, and Council President Flynn, who represents Chinatown. My name is Karen Chen. I'm with the Chinese Progressive Association. We are a grassroots community-based organization located at 20 Ash Street, and we, serve mostly immigrant families, low-income who are low-wage workers and also low-income seniors. This is not the first time that I actually testified in support of a transfer fee. We have talked about this for many, many years, and this is something the Chinese Progressive Association and members support greatly. And, and I'm not going to say more about kind of like, what Chinatown has been facing. I think we have heard it over and over again, the impact of gentrification, intense real estate development, land speculation, making housing unaffordable, and impacting mostly low-income residents. I think someone said earlier that Boston has a housing crisis. No, Boston has an affordable housing crisis. There are housing. The question is whether or not people can afford to live there. And also, I want to remind everyone that we're talking about property that are over $2 million. $2 million. And I have to say, personally, I like actually the 2019 version better, because I think that actually will help, more people. But I think what's more urgent is that we pass something. We have to, not only the city council should pass this, but really get, the state legislators on board as well. And I know that last year's version just, we put it out of committee favorably. If there's a way that actually can amend it, and get it, passed sooner, I would like that. But I'll let, the city to, work on that. And we were happy to support. But I think that, what we are seeing is that this is example one property in Chinatown, okay, on Tyler Street. It was, marketed at $2-something million, right? The owner actually decided to buy it to outbid people at $3 million. Now they're selling at $4.2 million. This is what's happening, in some of the neighborhoods. I'm sure that that's not, the act of every single transaction, but we know that this is happening. And we know this is the things that are actually having negative impact on people who are most vulnerable, in our community. So I think Boston has to make a decision of what kind of city do you want to be? How much do you want to care about the people, who are vulnerable? How much we want them to stay? How actually, how vibrant we want a community to be? And do we want Boston to be diverse? Do we want to be a place where people where you live and work and age? We don't have a lot of members, who are homeowners or seniors, but I really support the spirit of the exemption for the seniors so that they can actually age in place. And I would say that, we can have this debate over and over again. And I think what's important is that we get this passed and actually, get the money that we need for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen Chen. Next, if we have Catherine Martinez here, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm muting myself. Hello, everybody. Chairman Arroyo, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the petition for special law and act to further leverage commercial development to build housing, create jobs, and preserve inclusionary development, sponsored by Michelle Wu. I'm here both Catherine Martinez as the Director of Economic Development for the Mass Association of Community Development Corporations, but also as a resident of Boston, just to express a strong support for this petition. MACDC represents 20 CDCs in the city of Boston, which collectively have built over 8,000 affordable homes across the city. Our members are governed by local residents who serve on their board of directors. CDCs in Boston are dedicated to long-term affordability, high-quality property management, and robust resident services. We make a strong commitment to hiring firms, contractors, and subcontractors that are owned by people of color and women, and are committed to hiring community residents and people of color for their construction project. Significantly, we recycle our developer fees and other earned revenue into further community programming and services. Boston is a national leader in affordable housing, with over 1/3 of our rental housing stock reserved for people of low and moderate incomes. In total, the city has more than 54,000 homes with long-term affordability restrictions, a portfolio made possible by the years of investment and hard work by many people and institutions. Yet we know that we have much more work to do. According to the most recent Greater Boston Housing Report Card, 25% of households in Suffolk County pay more than half of their income for housing. And we know from prior research by the City of Boston in 2018 that more than 35,000 of those households are low-income, non-student households in the City of Boston. We also know that we have one of the largest racial homeownership gaps in the country, and we continue to have thousands of people who are without any stable housing at all. These problems do not just impact individuals and families, but entire neighborhoods as we continue to see displacement and gentrification across the city and the region. All of these longstanding challenges have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis and resulting in economic dislocation. To meet these challenges, we are putting together goals that will require new resources, significant new resources, and our organization is working hard to secure some of the resources from state government by advocating federal ARPA dollars and seeking passage of legislation to increase the state deed excise tax to generate funding for both housing and climate investments. However, we cannot rely on state resources to meet our needs, and we certainly can't wait for the federal government to return to its historical role in funding affordable housing. The city is going to have to generate more resources itself. This petition would help us do just that by enabling the city to impose a transfer tax on certain real estate transactions in the city of Boston. The proposal is well designed to secure revenue from those who can afford it and protect lower income and senior homeowners who rely on their home equity for financial security. The rapid rise in real estate value in recent years is the result of collective actions taken by the city and its residents to make Boston an attractive place to live, work, learn, and play. Currently, private landowners reap the full benefit of these improvements as they capture and keep the wealth being generated. A transfer tax ensures greater fairness and equity in using some of that added wealth to fund the affordable housing our city desperately needs. By taxing the real estate during a transfer of ownership, the tax approximately protects long-term owners and places a heavier burden on those buying and selling properties frequently and after shorter time periods. MACDC is also pleased to see the petition include added protections for senior homeowners who are struggling to pay rising property taxes. We know that this is a critically important, especially for those on fixed incomes. So I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to testify in support of this proposal. And at MACDC, we stand ready to work with the council and other elected officials to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Barry Friswold?
Sure, thanks. My name is Barry Friswold, and thank you, Chairman Arroyo and council members. I appreciate the time to speak. I don't have a fancy title like lots of the people on this call today, and I appreciate all your professional inputs. I'm just a resident here in the South End. I live in a development that what I would call is a really successful development that's about a third low-income home rental and a third limited income first-time or home buyer, and then a third market rate. And it's a really successful development, and I feel like it really helps the South End and my neighbors kind of fulfill living in a mixed income, mixed racial, mixed economic opportunity. And I love living here, and I think we're a great example of what we should have more throughout the city. I really like this proposal. I'm not a big fan of rent control. I think that's kind of an antiquated, been there, we've done that, and it's not effective. But what's on the table today is an innovative, really progressive thinking. And I love how you've broken it down to help both the elderly homeowners as well as regular home protections. It's a great idea. Some of the things that come to mind, though, is that before we go spending money on new initiatives, and by the way, I totally support, we do need it, but I'd also like to see some accountability as what we've already spent. So I know that existing developers have to put in set-asides or put some money aside for that income. And I'm guessing some of you on the call, know where that money's gone. But I'd like to see where those units have been spent, where it was built. I know some people who are actually in restricted income in fancy buildings like One Clarendon. Great, it's probably needed to be more. But I'd like to see like where that money has gone statistically and in what neighborhoods, because we're already spending that money. The other thing is, I'd like to see where some of the net increase in housing has gone. And I'm hopeful, I don't know this, but there's so many more units of housing where just down the block from me in Ink Block around Whole Foods, hundreds of units. I doubt they're affordable, but I might be wrong. The Seaport is another example. All along Southie, the warehouse district, there is net increases of housing, big housing units throughout the city. And my guess is that took 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, went from this available units of housing to this level. Well, that's income. That's rentals, that's developers, that's tax income to the city. And I'm hoping that part of our budgeting is, as we're getting that increased income, it's also going to housing. Shouldn't have to be a new initiative. We should just always be spending part of our coffer of income to those things. So that being said, I'd like to see some accountability for the past. I like that in this proposal, you're saying, yep, and we're going to be accountable for this new money. We're going to publish reports and where the housing's going and who's being helped. I love that that's in there. I love that you've got the $2 million exemption, because to some of the people who are not in favor of the bill today, I think that really helps sort of say, it's not blanket going to hurt everybody. We're accommodating that, what used to be $1 million in this city or $2 million isn't that much anymore for a lot of people. So thank you for carving that out. And I think that helps us, in the real estate market look and say, yep, it's not just a blanket, we're unfriendly to development. We're carving this out. So that's great. Richard Giordano raised a good point, and I just want to piggyback on it. And that is, how do we make sure that developers and investors like VRBO and Airbnb and flippers, people who aren't living there, are there some things that we can put in the provision that says, I've lived in my house for 5 or more years, and I am the primary investor, and I therefore am worthy of an exclusion. Whereas somebody who's not been there, heck, I say they don't even deserve the $2 million exclusion, but really we're trying to protect those people. So I did send some written testimony. I probably could talk a lot more about it. I'll hold my time there, but thanks for letting me weigh in, and good luck with this. I'm totally in support of it.
Thank you, Mr. Friswold. I don't know if there are any other attendees. That's all the folks who signed up for public testimony. If there's anybody who has not, actually, as I look through it, I see that every single person there has spoken. And so I want to thank all of the folks who testified today and gave public comment today for sticking through this hearing and making sure they were heard. I want to thank the administration. Thank you for your time and thank you for your answers and clarity. And I want to thank my fellow counselors. We almost had a full house today. So thank you everybody for your interest in this and your probing questions, and that makes this stuff better. So thank you everybody. With that, I'm going to adjourn this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.